Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. I'll just do a brief introduction before we get into the presentation. So my name's Laura Jessic. I'm the Sexual Assault Response Team and Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Program Manager with MCASA, and I'll give my co-presenter and colleague a second to introduce themselves as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leah Forney. I am the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Advocate, as well as the Underserved Populations Policy Advocate here at MCASA.
All right. So thanks for joining us today. I will say I put some polls into this presentation, and it's my first time managing polls. So everyone, please bear with me if I struggle to get that sorted out. But other than that, we're going to dig right into the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative project overview and how victim notification takes place. So, full disclosure, this presentation and our work on the SAKI project is supported by the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative grant, which is funded through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. It's a grant that focuses on reducing/eliminating, ideally, the backlog of untested and unsubmitted rape kits throughout the country. Just full disclosure, Maryland is one of many SAKI sites. We are only one of few sites that are statewide. Most SAKI sites are city, county, or jurisdiction specific. So if you look to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania has two SAKI sites, Allegheny County, which covers Pittsburgh and the city of Philadelphia. So just keep that in mind. Our work, I don't know why we chose to take a statewide approach, but I think it was a good idea. It's just a lot of lift. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation, that this affects all law enforcement agencies in the state and any survivor that was assaulted in the past in the state of Maryland. So a brief overview of the BJA's SAKI program and what the goals of the program are. First, we have what I just mentioned, addressing the growing number of unsubmitted or untested kits in the state of Maryland, and also preventing a future backlog. So we really try not to just focus solely on historical. We want to make sure that we're not focusing too much on historical to the point where we're falling behind on current cases. So really trying to find that balance and make sure kits are being tested for current cases as well, like they should be. So in doing that, the funding that we receive from the Bureau of Justice Assistance can be used for a number of different things. And the three things Maryland focuses on are inventory tracking and testing. I know that's three things within the first thing, but that's the first thing. So before we started our project, the state had to conduct a statewide inventory of all unsubmitted or untested SAKEs in the state of Maryland. We're then tracking those kits and then working to have them all tested. Obviously, then putting funding into investigations and prosecution of any cases. And then working on victim services and engagement, which is what MCASA is responsible for, the victim notification portion of the project. There's a couple other areas we could use money for down the road. We could use money for VICAP. So that's the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. So it works as a national database where you can input, I don't want to say characteristics, I guess, of a crime. So, for example, if an offender had a specific tattoo or wore a specific mask or anything that may identify a specific offender can go into this database, and law enforcement can search to see if any crimes with similar characteristics happened elsewhere in the country, and then those agencies can collaborate. We could also use money for lawfully owed DNA. That's a problem across the country as well. Offenders were convicted of a crime, and as part of their conviction, their DNA is supposed to be in the national database, but no one ever collected that DNA. So that's another project maybe for down the road. And then also expanding storage. This might be something critical for Maryland. In Maryland, all sexual assault evidence kits must be stored for a minimum of 20 years. And then as of October 1st, and here in a couple weeks, it'll be move from a minimum of 20 years to a minimum of 75 years. So it's likely that we will need more storage space down the road. So these are all areas where our focus and where our funding is being spent. So Maryland specifically worked on this project with the Sexual Assault Evidence Kit Policy and Funding Committee to apply for this SAKI grant. And then we used the funding to conduct our inventory, begin testing and tracking, support investigations and prosecution, conduct trainings like this, and do victim services like notification, what we're going to talk about today. So before I move into the next slide, I do want to ask, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the SAKI project and what's going on in Maryland, but I'm going to launch a poll, I think. And just curious how many kits you all think are in Maryland's untested kit inventory. So I'll give it a couple seconds for responses. Okay. It looks like the majority of you said that approximately 6,800 kits are in the Maryland's inventory, which would be correct. So basically, it was determined that when conducting the inventory, Maryland has 6,800 and some change untested or unsubmitted sexual assault evidence kits, plus an additional 700 partially tested kits. So that means a kit was tested, but let's say it had 10 DNA evidence swabs in it, and only two of them were submitted for testing. So if you add those numbers together, we're actually looking at about 7,500 untested kits in Maryland. Again, about 500 or so of those are from our partially tested kits. So before I dig into kind of the process of notification, I want to make a distinction. And I can't remember if this is on a later slide or not, but I want to note that there are two types of backlogs that the BJA recognizes. So in general, there's an untested backlog, and that's kind of I call it the traditional backlog that we may think about when just kind of talking about the backlogs. Kits that were sent for testing to the lab, but the lab is so inundated with cases that range from sexual assaults to homicides to burglaries, whatever it may be, that they can't catch up and get to those kits. So that's an untested backlog. That is not what Maryland has. Maryland has an unsubmitted backlog. So an unsubmitted backlog means that our lab is fully caught up with testing. These are all kits that, for whatever reason, law enforcement just decided did not need to be submitted for analysis. So it was a law enforcement agency or detective's decision not to have the kit submitted for testing for some reason. So that's the type of backlog that Maryland is looking at, just to be clear. So when developing the victim notification protocol, we MCASA again worked with the SAKI committee, which essentially operates as a statewide SART. It consists of a multidisciplinary group. So we have forensic nurses from across the state, law enforcement personnel, state's attorneys, legislatures, the crime lab. I think we have representation from all 5 crime labs in the state of Maryland. We also have MCASA, Rape Crisis Center advocates, and other interested parties, like the Board of Nursing also attends. So we have a lot of representation, and we worked with that group to develop the protocol. And we are not new to the SAKI grant. We are only 5 years into it, but there are some sites that existed a lot longer than us. And we really looked at their notification protocols and what they found worked for them. to kind of develop ours. It's really a difficult process. I wish it was very straightforward to consider best practices and how to go about these victim notifications, but we're dealing with the human factor. Each kit is associated with a human being who may or may not want to hear about their assault after all these years. Um, we also visited all sexual assault response teams in Maryland to get feedback from those stakeholders to hear their thoughts on the victim notification protocol as well. So we really tried to get buy-in and support and perspectives from all types of professionals and service providers. And then we also looked at research from other victim services organizations like the Joyful Heart Foundation, who did some research on what survivors kind of expect or would like if they're being notified about their kit. So just to be clear, and I feel like this slide is a little out of place in order of things, but when we're working with an individual that has experienced a sexual assault or rape, they may identify as a victim, they may identify as a survivor. Victim tends to be the terminology used when associated with the criminal justice system, because that's the language our courts and our statutory language use. But somebody may prefer the term survivor, which is often, some people consider that maybe after somebody moves through the criminal justice system if their case is prosecuted. We try to use the word survivor, but the BJA and the SAKI project in general do use the term victim. So you may hear me say both today. We just recommend that when working directly with a survivor or a victim, use the terminology that they would prefer and that they identify with. So the guiding principles of our victim notification protocol, just to be clear, when talking about a victim notification protocol, this is the steps and procedures that our staff, myself, Leah, and another victim advocate follow when reaching out to somebody who's affected by the backlog. That means we're contacting somebody years after their sexual assault to see if they want to re-engage with the system. So unfortunately, we have cases. The most recent case that we would have is from 2018. So all cases are a minimum of 5 years old. And we have cases that date back to the 1980s. And then Baltimore County is even working on an additional project that goes back even further into like the 70s. So years, anywhere from 5 years to 30, I can't do math beyond that, but a lot of years could have passed since somebody has heard about their rape or sexual assault. And we are calling them oftentimes out of the blue. Um, so we need to keep that in mind that not everyone is going to be happy to hear from us. Not everyone is going to want to talk to us. But we do want to try to engage with them. Keeping in mind that notification is not a one-time event. This, if somebody does want to engage with us, or even if they don't, it is an ongoing communication of support and advocacy being offered. So somebody may not want to engage with the project and talk to law enforcement about their kit, but they may identify some other needs that they have that we can assist with. So typically we're following the survivor's lead in terms of what type of support they need. So sometimes when I'm talking to a survivor, they're not sure how they want to move forward just yet, but they do agree and they would like regular check-in phone calls from me just to see how they're doing, if any questions popped up. It's not okay, you're not interested or you want time to think about it. Okay, let me know if you change your mind by in some scenarios that may be the case because that may be all somebody wants. They just want space, they don't want to hear from us, and they'll contact us if and when they're ready. We really follow the survivor's lead. And we also try and recognize that the notification process can raise a variety of questions, legal, psychological, and we're opening wounds that may have healed for some people and could cause a trauma response as well. So we'll try and empower each survivor. We'll talk about this to make the decisions that are right for them because there is a potential long-term impact on each survivor's well-being. So additional guiding principles is I'm sure everyone here has heard of the term victim-centered. Sure you're familiar with it and understand what it means, but just to reiterate, we do try to remain victim-centered. It's very important to us when we're working with any survivor of sexual assault, not just those affected by the backlog. And victim-centered, just to be, you know, just to reiterate what you probably already know, is that the victim is at the center of all decisions regarding their recovery and the next steps in the criminal justice system. This is something that we very much advocate and push for as advocates working with the notification, because sometimes law enforcement may test a kit that is 10 years old and they had opinions about the case, and that's why they never tested it. But they test it today and they identify an offender and they want to move forward with an investigation. Well, if the survivor says it's been 10 years and I'm really not interested in that and I don't want to reopen an investigation, we really advocate that that wish be honored, and try and collaborate with law enforcement to make them understand that 10 years has passed. And while we understand they are eager to move forward, we also need to balance the survivor's wishes, um, especially since law enforcement made the decision 10 years ago not to move forward in the first place. So we focus on the victim's choice, safety, and well being. And we really try and encourage that everyone's concerns are the victim. Again, it's like that piece of communicating with law enforcement. Just because they want to interview a victim or just because they want to reopen a case for whatever reason doesn't mean the victim wants to after all these years. And they shouldn't be pressing and pushing for them to be involved in something they are not ready or open to. And then, of course, we also have trauma informed, which to me, it very much lines up, it's parallel with victim centered. So making sure that while you're looking at the victim's needs and their choice first and foremost, you're also attending to the victim's emotional, safety, and physical needs. So this may be helping connect them with the local rape crisis center. We're regularly giving that information for counseling or just crisis line, as we're reopening those wounds. Also talking about physical safety. Unfortunately, we have cases where we make a phone call and we come to the realization one way or another that this is an abusive relationship and they're still together after all these years. So then we as a team get together and evaluate how to move forward, and if the victim wants to engage, then how to address their safety needs. So it's really just about making sure they know they have support and what resources and services are available to them. So when conducting notifications, we really tried to figure out a balance on how to do this when we were looking at the notification protocol. How do we, determine we want survivors to feel empowered to make choices? And we want, we also want to make sure each survivor has information about the project and their potential involvement. So we set up two forms of notification for survivors. The first is active notification. So this type of notification is when one of our advocates, myself, Leah, or Carrie, are reaching out to the survivor kind of blindly, or I hate to use the word coldly, but it's not necessarily a warm handoff. This is when law enforcement has sent us the case information and we're reaching out to see if we can get in touch with the survivor. This means they're not expecting the call, and it can be a very difficult conversation. And it often means that we don't even have the right contact information. If law enforcement is sending us a case that's 25 years old, the number they may have could also be 25 years old and no longer active for that survivor. So it's a lot of work on our end in terms of doing research to see if we can find more recent information for the survivor, and also just being prepared for anything should the survivor pick up the phone. How to initiate that conversation, how to make sure they're in a safe and private place, and how to move forward. So the protocol is very important, and Leah will get into the nitty-gritty of it a bit more in a little bit. We also have the opt-in line, which was meant to balance and ideally give survivors the opportunity to tell us what they want. So that means they can call our information line or email us on our email email address and tell us what they want. They can email us and say, "Hey, I was assaulted in 2017 in Montgomery County. I never heard about my kit. I don't know what happened with my case. Law enforcement stopped contacting me. And I would like to know more about what happened to my kit." We will then immediately start working with them, outlining what their contact preferences are, and moving forward to find out what happened to their kit. In contrast, we could have somebody contact us and say, "Hey, I was assaulted in 2003. I heard about this project. I don't know if my kit's going to be identified, but I never learned what happened to my kit. Don't contact me. I've moved on." We'll make note of that in our opt-in database, somebody doesn't want to be contacted. And then if their case comes up, we will not contact them. The important thing is that all survivors, whether contacted through the opt-in line or active notification, have the opportunity to change contact preferences. So if somebody says they don't want information about their kit and then a couple months later is like, "Okay, actually I do," we can engage with them. In contrast, I'm getting that I'm cutting in and out. I just got to notice that my internet is unstable. So if I lose you all, I apologize and Leah can take over. I only have a couple more slides and then Leah will work. Um, so I apologize for that. Alyssa, I'll keep an eye on my messages for you in case I do lose you. Um, but anyway, the opt-in, no matter how somebody is contacted, whether they contact us or we contact them, they have the opportunity to change their preferences. That means they can also say, "First, I said I didn't want information. Now I do want information." Or they could flip it. They could first say, "I do want to re-engage. I want to hear more about my kit. I want to talk to police," and then find out it's not something they're interested in. It's having a negative impact on their life, and then they can disengage, and that is fine as well. So I had another poll. I wanted to see when you guys think it would be best to notify a survivor that their kit was part of the backlog. So I'm going to launch that. Basically interested in your insight on, should we be contacting all 6,000 of these survivors before their kit is even sent for testing, once testing is complete, if an offender is identified, if there's going to be prosecution or a case by case scenario. So I'm going to give that a couple seconds. All right. So it looks like the majority of you said case by case. And then the next most common answer was before we test any historical kit. And what I think is kind of funny is when we started this project, I think we thought we had a really good like protocol and like, okay, this is how we're going to approach notification in every case. And then as we started working the protocol, no case is the same. And like I said earlier, there is the human factor as well. So we really have to collaborate with law enforcement and decide when notification is appropriate. But generally speaking, we have a combination of contacting survivors before their kit is sent for testing, once their testing is completed, or on a case by case scenario. So I'll explain this a little bit more in depth. In most cases, we are contacting somebody once testing is complete. This is because in Maryland, um, when a survivor gets a sexual assault forensic exam and reports to police, they are essentially giving consent to the analysis of their kit. unless they ever withdrew that analysis or consent to have their kit submitted for testing, then they expected their kit to be tested, and that's what the state should have done. So we don't want to slow down the process by trying to contact them in advance. It's really, I'll say it's actually really hard because we have a lot of wrong phone numbers and it would really slow down the process. So the majority of kits will be sent for testing, and then once testing is complete, we contact the survivor and let them know there's an update for information about their kit and would they like to hear that information. In some cases, we also contact survivors before their kit will be sent for testing. And unfortunately, this is required because sometimes what happened during the original investigation was law enforcement never obtained the necessary information to have the kit tested in the first place. So, for example, if somebody had a consensual partner within the 2-week period of the assault, we need to know who that consensual partner is, because if DNA is obtained, we need to make sure we're not saying, hey, your consensual partner is the offender. Also, if there's multiple DNA profiles, the lab needs to be able to sort that out as to whose DNA might be the offenders and whose is a consensual partner and should and is expected to be present in the kit. In some cases, no one ever asked those questions. So we have to go back and ask that now. We also have cases where law enforcement gave victims a waiver of investigation. So this is a piece of paper that says, I'm waiving my right to an investigation. I won't hold law enforcement accountable for not investigating the crime I reported. I won't reopen this case in the future, et cetera, et cetera. The use of these waivers is now prohibited in the state of Maryland because I mean, they're just a horrible practice. People were often felt pressured into signing them. People didn't know what they were signing, and they didn't understand. And it's just a horrible practice. So we're actually contacting those survivors and asking if they understood what they signed and if they still stand by that. And I think it's incredibly interesting that the majority of them say either they didn't know what they signed, they didn't understand, need to re-engage and want their kit tested, or understood what they signed, but they didn't think that law enforcement would send them with that form unless they did everything they could to investigate their case, including testing their kit. So they didn't realize their kit was never tested when they signed the form. And yes, they would like to move forward. I think it's pretty interesting that I'd say the majority of the cases for these waivers is that people do want their kit tested now. Oh, I will also say there's another scenario. There's a lot of scenarios we may contact somebody before their kit is sent for testing, but the other scenario that's not on here because I was not prepared for it to happen when I made these slides a while back. But there are also cases when somebody gets a kit collected, they need to collect the DNA sample, a clean DNA sample from the survivor. So this typically means a blood sample. It means that their DNA profile is not going to be mixed with the offenders or any consensual partners. It is, I don't think clean's the right word, but it is solely their DNA. And then again, the lab uses that to separate out DNA profiles once they test the kit. And unfortunately, there are also cases where the victim's DNA sample was never even taken. And just to be clear, they can't use what's in the kit because it could have a mixture in there. So that is also a scenario where we may have to contact somebody in advance. I do want to note that in general, we plan to notify every survivor impacted by the backlog, regardless of if their case is being prosecuted, if their offender was identified. It doesn't matter. We will plan to notify each survivor that we can. This is based on research from the Joyful Heart Foundation that conducted focus groups with survivors affected by the backlog. And the majority of them said that they deserve to know when anything happened to their kit. Whether or not there was DNA present, whether or not there was going to be a prosecution, they deserve to know it belonged to them. And in some ways, it's part of them, it's part of their body, and they felt they deserved and wanted to know. Now, we recognize that is not every survivor. And some survivors will not want to engage and may be angry that they're being notified. But we don't want to make that choice for survivors. I'm very passionate that we are in this situation because people made choices on behalf of survivors' case and on behalf of the survivors directly, but never told them what that choice was. And now we're in a position where people are unaware. So we take the stance that people deserve to be informed and then make the decision that's best for them. And we'll support them through that, whether they wanted the information or they were upset. And we always try and, Leah will get into it, evaluate that process as best we can. So my next question is a poll for who do you think should be responsible for conducting notifications? I feel like I kind of gave away how Maryland kind of handles this, but just interested in your insight on who should be handling those. Okay. So it looks like the majority said victim advocate, then law enforcement, and then a nurse. No one said attorney or other. So obviously, I think it's apparent based on this presentation that MCASA leads the efforts on victim notification. And MCASA SAKI advocate is tries to be the first point of contact with the survivor, just so that I want to say this as best as possible, but we have specific training on being trauma informed, and our focus lies on their desires and wishes more so than an investigation or a prosecution. So we try to be the first point of contact, but then after we make that contact, we take a team approach. So if they want to meet with law enforcement to discuss their kit or what it means for their case, then we will meet with the victim and law enforcement together. In some cases, law enforcement wraps in someone from the state's attorney's office as well, especially if they want to discuss possibly prosecuting the case. So sometimes an attorney is included as well. So we really try and take that team approach where there's communication going through all of us, because even as a victim advocate, we all work in our silos. So I think that we try to be sensitive to each individual's needs. We try to really pay attention to their emotional reaction and their desires, but we don't know what offender hit means for an investigation. We can't speak to what law enforcement's going to do next. We can't speak to what a prosecutor may think when looking at that case. So when trying to make sure somebody is fully informed, we really try to use the whole team approach for that. But MCASA is that first point of contact. And it tends to be because that initial phone call can be really upsetting. But and law enforcement is not necessarily always the person that's best trained to handle those emotions. So we really try and be that trauma-informed victim center first point of contact. Rape crisis centers can also do these notifications, but MCASA tends to be the hub, and that's a funding related issue. And also because we manage the opt-in database. So we want to make sure if opt-in, essentially opting out, honoring those risks. He opts in with us, and then the Rape Crisis Center, law enforcement does outreach without talking to us. Um, we could be violating their notification requests. And again, I got an internet unstable notice, so I hope I'm okay. I have one more slide. Or actually, I think I'm done. Yes, I'm done. So hopefully I will not need to I won't be cutting in or out anymore, and I will hand it over to Leah.
Thanks, Laura. So let's talk about how do we actually do notification. So the very first step in our notification process is our planning phase, right? So we take some time to really go through and prepare as much as possible for our notifications. So essentially what it looks like is law enforcement reaches out to us at MCASA. They send us over a request for notification. The request really should include why the notification is being conducted, right? So in that request, we'll make sure as the advocate, we'll do our part to make sure that this person hasn't already opted in. If they haven't, then we create a individualized notification plan based on their opt-in preferences. If there is no opt-in, then we as the SAKI advocate, we will collaborate to create that individual notification plan, right, which is based on the information that we receive from law enforcement. So that can be as simple as just law enforcement sending us whether this is what we consider pre-testing, right? So like Laura spoke to, is this a waiver situation? Is this a exclusionary samples where we need to know, were there any consensual partners prior to or around that mark when the test was done? And then they typically give us whatever contact information they have on file. So this can be tricky because as we're planning, like Laura mentioned, because with SAKI, we're going back so many years, oftentimes we run into situations where we have bad contact information, right? So we don't have a good up-to-date number, or the number has changed, or it's disconnected, or it's out of service. And so all of these things we can tend to run into when we're doing notifications. Next slide. So then the second step in our notification process is the contact step, right? So this is where we're really looking at opt-in preferences, right? So if a survivor opts in to our opt-in line, this is where we take a look at how they want us to contact them, and then we make sure that we contact according to those preferences, right? So keep in mind that we are blindsiding people with this project, right? Like these are people that have moved on with their lives. Sometimes they've gotten married, their last names have changed, all these things. And so when they opt in to be contacted by us, they might just say, hey, send me a text message, or, or only call me between the hours of 5 p.m. and 7 p.m., or only call me 9 a.m. in the morning, right? And we want to make sure that we are adhering to that. We want to make sure that we are abiding by that. And that could be for a variety of reasons, right? One, they're caught off guard that we're calling them about a historical case, but then also depending on where that survivor is in their life, right? Maybe their family is not aware of what happened to them. Maybe their spouse is not aware of what happened to them. So we want to make sure that when they opt in, that we are taking their preferences into consideration. Now, if a survivor doesn't opt in, right, and we're contacting them based on the information that law enforcement has provided us, right, we at MCASA make the first contact, right? So we tend to make sure that we reach out first, let them know a little bit about the SAKI project, let them know why we're calling them, and then see where they are in their journey. Are they looking to get more information about their testing results, right? Or are they kind of off-putted and saying, you know what, I don't necessarily know if right now is the time, right? Or if I'm ready to handle this. Either way, we still want to make sure that we're adhering to how they feel. And again, this is all about survivor choice. So then the third step in our notification process is our follow-up meeting. So after we have had a conversation with a survivor, after we have talked to the survivor and let them know that why we're reaching out to them, explain the SAKI project, right? We definitely tend to follow up. And again, the follow-up meeting is based on their preferences, right? So after that initial contact, if they say that they do want to move forward with their kit being tested, and they would like to talk to law enforcement, oftentimes what we have found is that they don't mind talking to law enforcement as long as there's an advocate present, right? And so in that follow-up meeting, right, that is where we would say to law enforcement, hey, this survivor not only says that they want to get their kit tested, they would like a meeting with you to discuss their test results, discuss any next steps, right? But they also would like an advocate present. And so we will work together as a team to make sure that we have that follow-up meeting in a timely manner. While during that follow-up meeting, one of the things that we stress so much to law enforcement is the importance of an apology, right? We at MCASA want law enforcement to understand that we need to be apologizing on behalf of the system, right? Because it is the system that failed these survivors. And so we definitely, I will apologize as an advocate when I'm in those meetings, and then we would ask law enforcement to do the same. The other thing that we do in that follow-up meeting is that we make referrals for any appropriated resources. So if they are in need of maybe some counseling services, right, or any type of, or they're having a housing need or any type of resources that they're looking for, we make sure that in that meeting, they walk away with those referrals. So let's talk a little bit about the apology. The apology piece is absolutely positively critical. I cannot stress it enough. You know, other SAKI sites and Maryland agencies have already witnessed the power of offering the apology, right? Research has shown us that many survivors feel better about the circumstances of their case when someone acknowledges the error, when they acknowledge how they've been treated. And so it is absolutely positively critical that when we are engaging with our survivors, that they receive an apology, right? Because the apology is what's going to help them more likely want to re-engage. But the minute we still take this off-putting, like it's not our fault approach, it can make it really, really hard for them to want to re-engage with the system that has already failed them. So here's some tips for beginning to offer an apology. So for our advocates, again, know that the apology from an advocate is extremely powerful. It's extremely necessary, right? And so we want to, start off by really just acknowledging where that the pain and the uncertainty that the experience has caused them, right? We want to say, I'm sorry for the pain and the uncertainty you've experienced after reporting that sexual assault. But also, we want them to understand that we're here. We're available to support them. We're available to provide information for local resources if they need it. And for our law enforcement, we want them to be able to say something to the effect of like, I'm sorry for how we originally handled this case, right? I'm sorry and I'm apologizing on behalf of the police department. We're changing our policies to ensure that all investigations are thorough. And that is why we've tested your kit. Again, offering and extending that support, letting them know I am here to support you. And if you have any questions that need to be answered, I'm here. Again, I can't stress it enough. The apology is absolutely a critical component to the work that we do on this project. So now let's talk about how do the notifications continue to take place. So step 4 in our process is really empowering them, right? So after we've had that follow-up meeting, we want to empower survivors with an opportunity to really tell us how they want to move forward, right? So how do they want to be contacted? Sometimes at the end of that follow-up meeting, a survivor might feel like they've gotten everything that they need. And so they might not need us to contact them anymore, right? Sometimes they might feel like, you know what, if you could check in every month, that would be great, right? But we empower them to tell us, how do you want us to move forward, right? How would you like us to contact us, right? We also empower them to decide on when does the interview take place? When does that follow-up meeting take place? When and where, right? Because it's all about the survivor's choice in the matter. Like, we're going to show up where you say you want us to show up. If you want us to come to your home, we'll come to your home. If you want us to meet you at the park, we'll meet you at the park. If you say, you know what, I'd rather do this on Zoom, we'll do it on Zoom. But it's all about empowering them, right? And then we ask them, how involved do they want to be in this process, right? Do you want to know step by step, right? Or do you want to know when it's just necessary to find out? How involved would you like to be in this process? And then also, we empower them whenever necessary to seek out professional help, right? And in our empowerment piece, we give them an opportunity to be able to speak privately, right? So in our follow-up meetings, we do our best to make it in a private space where they can speak directly to an advocate or they can speak directly to law enforcement without the interruptions. And step 5 in our process is the survey. So here at MCASA, we have been diligently working on a survey that we want to send out to all survivors after we've had a follow-up meeting to really get some real feedback on how that experience was for them, right? And so we want to take time to conduct to contact that survivor and conduct a survey so we can get some more information and make sure that there are not areas that we are overlooking. We have to keep in mind that SAKI is new territory, right? And so we're not going to always get it right. And so getting the impact or getting the information directly from the survivor themselves is going to help us make this process even better. So we're going to talk a little bit about the SART involvement and our local SART involvement. Again, we've mentioned throughout this training that we tend to take a team approach, right? And so that's where our SART and teams come into play, right? Because it's an opportunity for us to collaborate. It's an opportunity for us to communicate, right? And so in our SART meetings, that is where we're discussing what survivors are impacted by when it comes to SAKI, right? We're talking about how can we meet those needs. We're discussing and making sure that everyone has an understanding of the protocol, right? Everybody understands how to work with us here at MCASA, but also with law enforcement, making sure that we're making those proper referrals when needed. But we're also encouraging our team members to really look at the numbers and look at our cases with open eyes, making sure that we're not missing something or we're not overlooking something. And so in our SART teams, we tend to conduct research we conduct outreach to agency participation. Like the more people we can get, the more hands we can get, the more help we can have when it comes to making sure that we're helping our survivors really be able to recover after this sexual assault. So, what can you do to help? One, definitely share the protocol with your member agencies. Definitely post your opt-in post our opt-in line information in your agency's website, social media accounts. Definitely work towards ensuring that your SART remains COMAR regulated. Of course, conduct outreach to agencies that may not be actively involved, right? Again, this is a team approach. This is a collaborative approach. And so here at MCASA, we can only do but so much. And so that's why we rely on each and every one of you to really help us spread the word about our opt-in lines and really help us spread the word about the SAKI project.
Okay, so that wraps up our presentation on the process of our SAKI notification protocol and the SAKI project in Maryland. We want to end with a survivor story, actually from our lovely victim advocate that you just heard from, Leah Forney. This is a recording from a previous presentation where she actually spoke directly to law enforcement. Kind of keep that in mind when you're listening to her story as she's speaking directly to law enforcement and how they can, what steps they can do to have better engagement with victims. I think it still does apply to advocates as well. It's a very powerful story. Keep in mind that there is just a brief kind of narrative of the assault itself. So if you need to kind of step away or turn off your volume during that portion for whatever reason, we completely understand and respect that. I will say that the volume, I think, on this video is pretty low. So I've tried fixing it on my end. If it's low, first, I would recommend increasing your volume on your computer. And if that doesn't work, I can see what works on my end. But worst case scenario, we'll include a link to this video in the emails that go out tomorrow. Just keep in mind it's a recording of the entire presentation. So you'd want to, unless you want to sit through the entire thing again, skip to the end and to hear Leah's story. So I'm going to get that started. I think I just have to fast forward, so bear with me.
Sally, for this opportunity to share with you guys. As Laura mentioned, I am a thriver of sexual assault. I do not see myself as a victim or a survivor of sexual assault, but it was not always like that for me, right? And so for me, the day that my life changed drastically, or what I like to call a defining moment in my life, was January 27th, 2013, in the state of North Carolina. I was raped in my apartment by somebody I knew. And so, before I go into the details about that or give a brief synopsis about that, one of the things that I want to do is kind of dismantle some myths. And that is because when I have worked with law enforcement, a lot of the conversation was that I wasn't believed because I knew the person. And so, just statistically wise, I want somebody to hear this, that 9 out of 10 victims of rape are female. 55% of sexual assault occur at or near the victim's home. 8 out of 10 rapes occur by someone the victim knew. 39% of those rapes are committed by an acquaintance, and 33% of those rapes are committed by either a current or former spouse, boyfriend, and or girlfriend. Now, you're probably saying, why does that even matter, right? And that is because as a thriver of sexual assault, I fell into those statistics. And because I fell into those statistics, I felt that my case was mishandled because law enforcement did not believe that because I knew the person, had a casual dating life with that person, that they could not have raped me, right? And so, just a brief synopsis of my story. I met my perpetrator after living in the state of North Carolina for 2 years. We met at a car rental place. He was working at the car rental place at the time. I happened to be there because I was looking for to rent a car due to my car breaking down. Right? He was very charming. He was very sweet. We engaged in conversation. When I decided not to get the car rental, he offered to drive me home. Hence, he knew where I lived. He even offered to take me to dinner. Hence, he was charming, right? So after about 1 or 2 dates with this individual, I decided not to see him anymore. But he was always around. He was always around, and he would always randomly pop up in places where I was. It was almost as if he had a GPS on me, right? January 27, 2013, he randomly calls me, right? When he randomly calls me on that specific day, I happen to be in a very emotional state because I just got off the phone after receiving a phone call of a loved one passing. So when he calls me that day, I'm already an emotional wreck. He offers to come over and console me. And against my better judgment, I allow him to. Little did I know he was already sitting outside my apartment. So he comes to my house again under the guidance of I'm here to support, here to comfort you. But the minute he walked in my unit, something just did not feel right. There was this gut wrenching feeling on the inside of me that says something is not right. He sat on my couch, and instead of consoling me, he proceeds to want to argue about why I no longer wanted to deal with him. I asked him to leave. And as he pretended to leave, he immediately grabs me and proceeds to rape me right there in my apartment. Now, you can imagine, and that's just a brief synopsis of what happened on that day. You can only imagine the emotional turmoil, the physical turmoil, the upset, the fear that I was in that moment in time in my life. And because of that, I really wanted to share just that synopsis so you can understand how difficult this is when you're encountering a victim or a survivor or a thriver of sexual assault. Not many of them have what I like to call the resiliency factor. For me, I was able to bounce back. I was able to get the support, go to therapy, rely on my family, rely on my friends, rely on my spirituality and God to get me through. So many of them don't have that opportunity. And so I wanted to leave you guys with an understanding of how to look at victims. I think many times when we encounter a victim, whether it's of sexual assault of any crime, we immediately think that this individual is weak. And we're not weak. We may be in a weakened state because emotionally we are trying to process all that we feel and all that is coming to us, but we really want to be empowered. We really want to make the right decision for us in order to get through what it is that we're facing. And so, every victim, survivor, or thriver of sexual assault needs the following from law enforcement or anyone that they come in contact with, right? And so the V in victim stands for validation. Put yourself in their shoes. What if that was your daughter? What if that was your mom? What if that was your aunt? What if that was your uncle? Put yourself in their shoes. Empathize with them. Listen to them. Offer an apology. And let me say, the apology is not coming from a personal place. We're not saying you have to personally take responsibility for what happened. But what we are saying is, hey, it would be nice to say, you know what? We dropped the ball. I am sorry. So offer an apology. Validate what it is that we're feeling. Validate what it is that we're experiencing. The I in victim stands for insight. Don't be afraid to provide them with resources and information about the process from beginning to end. One of the things I wish the state of North Carolina did was give me insight. It's a lot of information that I found out 8 years later after my rape kit was tested that I wish I knew 8 years ago when I was going through this process. And so, because I didn't have the insight, I didn't know what the process was going to look like. I didn't know that after the rape kit comes, then I have to go through the notification process and have to meet with the DA. And I didn't know these things. So, provide the insight, give them the resources. And if you don't know, connect them to somebody that does know so that they feel like they can make a very informed decision about what it is that they want because this is their choice. The C in victim stands for compassion. Again, be a listening ear. They're not trying to beat you up. They're not trying to blame you for what has happened. They just want to be heard. We just want to be heard. And again, I can only share from my experience. I wish that I was heard. I wish that I didn't have to stand in front of, and I'll share when I encountered law enforcement, the officer literally asked me 7 times, was I sure that he raped me because I knew him? 7 times I counted. That's not being compassionate. If I tell you that that's what it was, then compassion is believing me enough to say, okay, we'll take the report. We'll do what we have to do to support you. So be compassionate. The T in victim stands for timely. Provide them with timely and up-to-date information regarding their case. I shouldn't have to wait 8 years to find out that the DNA test came, like it was a DNA match on my rape kit. That to me, that's an injustice. So provide them with timely information. Let them know, hey, this is where we are in the process. This is what needs to happen next. This is the part we need you to play. Again, taking them on that journey with you, step by step together. It's a partnership. And I know law enforcement a lot of times get a bad rap, but you want to know how we can build that bridge? It's to partner together with the victim, the survivor, or the thriver. Because we don't know what's best for us, but the more insight we get, the more we can make an informed decision. The I in victim stands for instruction. Again, be willing to guide them through this process. Be willing as they make a decision. And let me tell you, the decision is very hard to make. And it's not a you wake up the next day and boom, I want to go ahead and prosecute. No, it's very hard to make. And so give that space. Be willing to be as patient as they need you to be during this process. Ask them, how can I support you in making this decision? Because again, it is not that easy to make. As someone who just had to make that decision again 8 years later for my rape kid, it wasn't easy. I went back and forth with my support system. I went back and forth in my mind. I went prayed about it. I talked to my therapist about it. I did all these things to process just to make the decision. So again, be willing to guide them, be willing to hold their hand, be willing to support them in making that decision. And then the M in victim stands for mindfulness. Always keep in mind that you are encountering somebody's child, somebody's friend, somebody's colleague, somebody's sibling, somebody's parent. So practice mindfulness. Again, we want to work with law enforcement because we don't understand this process. But it's very hard to do when we encounter law enforcement to be cold or don't believe us. I'll tell you, I got raped on a Sunday. I didn't report it till Tuesday. And it's because of my fear that nobody was going to believe me. It was because of my shame of this could I allowed this to happen because I let him in my house. So unless you have experienced it for yourself, you're not going to understand how difficult this really is. And so, in closing, I just really want you guys to begin to think of the word victim in a different way. It's no longer the definition that we're used to. It really is providing practical steps that you can take when you're encountering any victim of a crime. Okay. And again, that is to validate, that is to give insight, that is to be compassionate, that is to provide timely information, give instruction, and of course, be mindful. And so, again, I thank you guys for allowing me to really be a part of this training. And I hope that you guys take this information with you, hearing it directly from a thriver of sexual assault, that this is what we need in order to work successfully together when dealing with sexual assault cases.
All right. So that wraps up our presentation for today. Unless anyone has any questions, again, Leah is on the actual call right now. If you have any questions for her, just would ask that you be mindful. I wouldn't expect anyone from this group to ask any offensive questions, but just be mindful. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think I can also share my screen again because I wasn't thinking. And this is both of our contact information on your screen. Should you want to reach out to either one of us about SAKI or really anything else we've talked about during the SAVIT training. And other than that, I think that wraps up our presentation unless you have anything to add, Leah.
Not none over here. Thanks again for joining us.
Oh, yeah, and that I don't know why, but I just realized if anyone is interested in helping us spread information about our opt-in line, we really want as many people as possible to know about it so that we can try and have them contact us and let us know if they even want to hear from us or how they'd like to hear from us in the future. So if you're interested, we have some pre-made like flyers, social media posts in both English and Spanish that you or your agency could use. So you can always reach out to us for those documents, posts, images, whatever. And we can maybe also put a link to some of that in tomorrow's email. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll stick around a couple minutes to see if there's any questions.